Life was slow in the small town of Caldwell, Idaho. The streets were lined with trees and neighbors knew each other by name. The Davis family, who lived on the outskirts of town, seemed like a model of stability. Robert Davis, a 42-year-old auto mechanic, his wife Linda, a school teacher, and her daughter from her first marriage, 19-year-old Emily, lived in a modest house with a white picket fence. From the outside, their life looked calm, but behind closed doors there were secrets that no one could have predicted. In 2018, the quiet town was shaken by an event that would forever change the lives of many of its residents. This story began with ordinary moments, but led to a tragedy that locals still talk about with caution. At the center of events was a relationship that no one discussed out loud. Emily, a young girl with ambitions to go to college, and Robert, the man who replaced her father when she was still a child, were hiding something that destroyed their family. Their relationship, which began unnoticed, grew into a chain of events that no one could stop. Caldwell, Idaho, 2016. The town of just over 50,000 people was a typical American suburb. Rarely did anything out of the ordinary happen here. The Davis family moved here in 2010 when Emily's mother, Linda, married Robert. Linda, a 38-year-old math teacher at a local school, was a woman of strict principles. She raised Emily alone after divorcing her first husband until she met Robert, a reliable and calm man who worked in a car repair shop. Emily, who was 11 at the time, quickly became attached to her stepfather. Robert helped her with her homework, drove her to school events, and even taught her to ride a bike. From the outside, their family seemed perfect. By 2016, Emily was 17 years old. She was a high school senior, dreaming of going to Boise State University and studying psychology. The girl was active. She participated in the school theater club, worked part-time at a local coffee shop, and helped her mother around the house. Robert, who was already in his 40s, continued to work in the workshop, but his life began to change. He began to stay late at work more often, and at home he seemed thoughtful. Linda, immersed in school, did not notice the changes in her husband. She trusted him and believed that their marriage was strong. At this time, subtle changes began to occur in the family. Emily began to spend more time with Robert. They often went shopping or for walks out of town together, which Linda considered a normal manifestation of her stepfather's care. However, something appeared in their communication that defied explanation. Emily's close friends noticed that she became secretive, sharing personal matters less often. One of her friends later recalled that Emily once mentioned how much she valued Robert, but quickly fell silent, as if she was afraid to say too much. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread in Caldwell. Neighbors noticed that Robert and Emily often spent time together while Linda was at work. Someone saw them driving home late at night in Robert's car, although Emily said she was visiting a friend. These little things did not arouse serious suspicion, but they left questions. Why did Emily, so outgoing and sociable, begin to avoid her friends? And why did Robert, always reserved, become nervous when the conversation turned to his relationship with his stepdaughter? In 2017, things got more complicated. Emily graduated from high school and started preparing for college. She applied to several universities, but suddenly gave up on the idea of leaving Caldwell. Linda was surprised. Her daughter had always dreamed of living on her own. Emily explained that she wanted to stay close to her family, but her words sounded unconvincing. Linda began to suspect that her daughter was hiding something, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She tried to talk to Robert, but he assured her that everything was fine and changed the subject. At the same time, Robert began to disappear from home more often. He said he was taking on extra shifts at the shop, but colleagues later confirmed that he often left earlier than usual. His behavior raised questions, but no one dared to ask them directly. Linda, busy with work and school projects, did not attach much importance to this. She trusted her husband and daughter, unaware that their relationship had already gone beyond family. By late 2017, tensions were mounting in the Davis household. Emily had become withdrawn, and Robert was irritable. Linda noticed that her daughter was avoiding conversations about the future, and her husband was increasingly withdrawn. Neighbors continued to whisper, but no one knew what was going on behind the walls of their home. On the outside, the family maintained a facade of well-being, but on the inside, everything was falling apart. Something had to happen for the truth to come out. By early 2018, tensions were growing in the Davis family home in Caldwell, Idaho. Linda Davis, busy with her schoolwork, was unaware that her daughter Emily and her husband Robert were increasingly alone together. Emily, who was 19, had officially dropped her plans to attend college, saying she wanted to take a year off to think about it. Linda was puzzled by the decision, but she decided not to press her daughter, believing that she was going through a difficult time. Robert, in turn, supported Emily's choice, which further strengthened Linda's trust in him as a caring stepfather. But behind this apparent harmony lay another reality. Emily and Robert were spending more and more time together, and their behavior was becoming suspicious. Neighbors noticed Robert picking Emily up from the coffee shop where she worked part-time, even when her shift ended late. Sometimes they were seen in the car together on deserted roads outside the city. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Martha, later reported that she once saw Emily and Robert sitting in the car outside their home, quietly talking, instead of going inside. She thought nothing of it, but she did notice that Emily seemed agitated. During this time, Emily began to distance herself from her friends. Her best friend, Sarah, tried to find out what was going on, but Emily was evasive. When asked why she stopped going to parties, Emily would just shrug and say she needed more time with her family. Sarah noticed that Emily checked her phone frequently and became nervous when anyone mentioned Robert. These little things seemed insignificant, but later became important details in understanding what was going on. Robert had changed, too. At the auto repair shop where he worked, his colleagues noticed that he had become absent-minded. One of the mechanics, Joe, recalled that Robert would sometimes disappear for an hour or two without explaining where he was going. His phone constantly vibrated with messages, but he never opened them in front of his colleagues. When Joe once asked if everything was okay, Robert abruptly replied that it was none of their business. This behavior was unusual for him because he had previously been friendly and open. Linda, despite her busy schedule, began to suspect something was wrong. She noticed Emily and Robert exchanging glances that seemed strange to her. One evening, when Linda returned home earlier than usual, she found them in the living room talking, which abruptly stopped as soon as she entered. Emily quickly went to her room, and Robert began to talk about the weather. Linda tried to discuss this with her husband, but he assured her that he was simply helping Emily with her life plans. Linda wanted to believe, but doubts began to creep in. In the spring of 2018, the situation became more complicated. Emily began to stay home more often, citing fatigue. She stopped working at the coffee shop, explaining that she wanted to focus on finding herself. Linda, concerned about her daughter's behavior, suggested that she see a psychologist, but Emily categorically refused. Robert, on the contrary, seemed calmer than before, but his calmness seemed unnatural. He began buying Emily gifts, a new phone, clothes, explaining this by the desire to support his stepdaughter during a difficult period. Linda found this strange, but did not want to start a quarrel. Rumors continued to spread in Caldwell. A local store owner once mentioned seeing Robert and Emily grocery shopping together, and their behavior seemed too intimate for a stepfather and stepdaughter. These rumors reached Linda, but she brushed them off, unwilling to believe the worst. But tensions in the family grew, and each day brought new unanswered questions. The summer of 2018 was hot in Caldwell, Idaho, but the Davis family home was cold. Linda Davis, still immersed in her work, began to notice that her family was falling apart. Emily, who was 19, rarely left the house, spending most of her time in her room or with Robert. Robert, in turn, became even more withdrawn, avoiding long conversations with his wife. Linda sensed that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She tried to chalk it up to the stress of Emily's changes, but her gut feeling was that the problem was deeper. Emily had virtually stopped communicating with the outside world. Her friend Sarah, worried about the long silence, came to the Davis house several times, but Emily either did not answer the door or said she was busy. On the rare occasions when they did meet, Sarah noticed that Emily seemed depressed. Once, during a short conversation in the park, Emily admitted that she felt cornered, but refused to explain what she meant. Sarah offered to help, but Emily just shook her head and left. Sarah later said that Emily kept looking back that day, as if she was afraid that someone would see them. Robert also behaved unusually. In the auto repair shop, his behavior became a topic of discussion. Co-workers noticed that he often left in the middle of the workday, citing personal matters. One of the mechanics, Mike, once saw Robert parked at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where he met Emily. Mike did not intervene, but the scene seemed strange to him. He shared his observation with another co-worker, and soon rumors about Robert and Emily began to spread among the workers of the shop. No one dared to speak about it openly, but the questions accumulated. Linda finally had enough. In July 2018, she decided to confront Emily directly. One evening while Robert was at work, Linda knocked on Emily's door. Emily didn't open the door right away, and Linda noticed that her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. Linda asked what was going on and why her daughter had changed so much. Emily was evasive, saying that she was just worried about the uncertainty of the future. Linda tried to press her, but Emily asked her to leave her alone. The conversation only made Linda more anxious. She began to monitor her daughter, noticing how often Emily texted someone on her phone, hiding the screen from prying eyes. Linda soon discovered another detail. While checking the family accounts, she noticed that Robert had withdrawn several $100s from their joint account without explaining what it was used for. When Linda asked her husband about it, he said the money was used to repair a customer's car, but his tone was nervous. Linda decided to check his words and called the shop, where she was told that no major repairs had been done during that period. This was the first real evidence Linda had that Robert was hiding something. The rumors in Caldwell continued to grow. At the local church Linda attended on Sundays, a woman hinted that she had seen Robert and Emily in a car late at night. Linda brushed it off, but the words stuck in her head. She began to take a closer look at their behavior at home. One day, when Emily went to take a shower, Linda took her phone and tried to unlock it, but the password had been changed. This was unusual. Emily had never hidden her phone before. Linda sensed that the truth was close, but she was still not ready to accept it. By August 2018, the tension in the house had reached a breaking point. Linda noticed Robert and Emily exchanging quick glances at dinner and how they would fall silent when she entered the room. She began asking questions, but the answers were either evasive or irritated. Linda knew she couldn't ignore what was happening any longer, but she was afraid of what she might find out. By September 2018, the Davis family home in Caldwell, Idaho, was becoming unbearable. Linda Davis could no longer ignore the strange behavior of her husband, Robert, and daughter, Emily. She noticed their secret conversations, their quick glances, and their avoidance of being alone with her. Linda felt her family was falling apart, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Her suspicions, fueled by rumors and her own observations, reached a peak, and she took action. One morning, when Robert had left for work and Emily was still asleep, Linda decided to search her daughter's room. She knew she was violating Emily's privacy, but desperation got the better of her. In a dresser drawer, Linda found a small notebook that Emily used as a diary. Leafing through the pages, she came across entries that made her heart clench. Emily wrote about her feelings for a man she referred to only by the initials R. The entries were full of emotion. Emily described how hard it was for her to hide her feelings and how she was afraid that their secret would ruin everything. Linda immediately realized that R stood for Robert. Shocked, Linda decided to check Robert's phone. That evening, while he was taking a shower, she took his smartphone and, to her surprise, discovered that it was unlocked. In the messages, Linda found correspondence between Robert and Emily. The messages were cautious, without obvious details, but their tone was too personal. They arranged meetings, discussed how to avoid suspicion, and even mentioned places outside the city where no one would see them. Linda felt the ground slipping from under her feet. Her husband and daughter were hiding something from her that went beyond their family relationship. Linda decided to confront them. That evening, she called Emily and Robert into the living room. She put her notebook and phone on the table and demanded an explanation. Emily turned pale, and Robert tried to pretend he didn't understand what she was talking about. Linda didn't back down. She read excerpts from the diary and showed them the messages. Emily burst into tears and ran out of the room, and Robert started screaming, accusing Linda of invading their privacy. At that moment, Linda realized that her worst fears had been confirmed. The next day, Linda filed for divorce. She also insisted that Emily move out of the house, suggesting that she stay with an aunt in a nearby town. Emily, dejected and confused, agreed. Robert, in turn, quit his job at the auto repair shop and moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Caldwell. Rumors of what was happening quickly spread throughout the town. Neighbors, friends, and co-workers discussed the Davis family's breakup, but no one knew the full truth. Linda tried to hold on, but inside she was broken. She couldn't understand how her daughter and husband could do this to her. Meanwhile, Emily and Robert continued to communicate. Despite their breakup with Linda, they would meet secretly at motels and on deserted roads. Emily, torn between guilt and her attachment to Robert, could not break the bond. Robert, having lost his job and family, became increasingly desperate. He urged Emily to leave Caldwell and start a new life together, but she was hesitant. Their meetings became increasingly tense, as both realized that their actions had destroyed their family. In October 2018, things started to get out of hand. Linda, having learned from friends that Emily and Robert were still seeing each other, contacted a lawyer to limit their contact. She also shared her suspicions with the local sheriff, who began keeping an eye on Robert. In Caldwell, where everyone knew everyone, such news couldn't go unnoticed. People began to avoid Robert, and Emily avoided leaving her aunt's house. By November 2018, the Davis family story was the talk of the town in Caldwell, Idaho. Linda and Robert's divorce, Emily's departure to live with her aunt, and rumors of a secret affair between Robert and his stepdaughter were discussed everywhere from local coffee shops to church gatherings. Linda was trying to rebuild her life by focusing on her work, but the pain of betrayal lingered. Emily, staying with an aunt in nearby Nampa, was avoiding contact with her mother, and Robert, living in a motel on the outskirts of Caldwell, was a shadow of his former self. But their story was not over, and the events that followed rocked the town. Robert, now jobless and without a family, began to behave more and more erratically. He called Emily frequently, begging her to meet. Emily, torn between guilt and fear, agreed to the occasional meetings, but their conversations ended in arguments. Robert insisted that they leave Idaho and start a new life, but Emily was unsure. She knew that their affair had destroyed the family, and she was afraid of the consequences. However, she could not completely cut off contact with Robert, which only made the situation worse. Linda, having learned from Emily's aunt about her daughter's continued meetings with Robert, decided to take action. She contacted the police to investigate Robert's behavior, reporting her suspicions about his relationship with Emily. The Caldwell sheriff began informal surveillance of Robert, but the police did not have enough evidence to make an arrest. Linda also hired a private investigator to gather information about Robert's movements. The detective confirmed that Robert and Emily had met several times at a motel and abandoned parking lots outside of town. This information was the last straw for Linda, who decided to file a lawsuit to protect her daughter. On the evening of November 15, 2018, the situation reached its climax. Emily, despite her aunt's entreaties, drove to Caldwell to meet Robert at a motel. Their conversation, which began calmly, quickly escalated into an argument. Robert, in despair, demanded that Emily make a decision to leave. Emily, feeling the pressure, tried to leave, but the situation got out of control. Police later determined that there was a conflict at the motel, resulting in Emily receiving injuries incompatible with life. Robert, realizing what had happened, fled the scene. The next morning, police found Emily's body in a motel room after a call from the receptionist who noticed the broken window. Robert became the prime suspect. His car was found abandoned 20 miles outside of Caldwell, but Robert himself was missing. The police issued a wanted notice for him, and panic broke out in the town. Residents, shocked by the news, could not believe that their quiet town had become the site of such a tragedy. Linda was devastated when she learned what had happened. She blamed herself for failing to protect her daughter and for not seeing the truth sooner. Emily's funeral was held behind closed doors, and Linda refused to speak to the press. Caldwell went into mourning, and rumors about what led to the tragedy continued to mount. Robert was arrested a week later in the neighboring state of Oregon. He offered no resistance and confessed to the crime, saying he did not want it to happen. The trial began in March 2019 and lasted several months. Robert was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Details of the case, including the nature of his relationship with Emily, were partially kept from the public out of respect for the family.